Hey, what's up guys, Sensus here, and today we're going to be doing an updated rogue macros video. The last one I did was towards the end of Kata, and I think it's about time we finally make an updated version of this. This is one of those videos that gets requested pretty much every day on my YouTube and on my Facebook, so I think it's about time that we go ahead and make this. Now before we get started, I just want to briefly go over how I'm going to be presenting this. For macros that I think are a bit complicated, I'm going to go into detail and demonstrate them. But for macros that I feel are pretty much self-explanatory, I'm not really going to go into detail about them. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to have a list of all my macros in the description so you guys can just go ahead and copy them down. Now let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so these first three macros are just arena frame focus macros, and all they pretty much do is make it so you can easily focus target an opponent in an arena match. You don't have to worry about right-clicking Gladiator or anything like that. This next macro is just your basic Shadow Dance macro, and what it does when you pop it, it'll pop your PvP trinket and Shadow Dance, and if you hit it again, it'll cast Ambush. And the main reason why I have Ambush worked into that is to eliminate any bar lag that I might have when I cast Shadow Dance. Next up is a useful macro for any engineer out there. This is a shift modifier macro, and I have it set up so if I don't use shift, it'll cast my belt, but if I use shift, it'll cast my mount. It's good to have so you don't take up any unnecessary space on your action bars. Next up, we have a basic all-out burst macro for Assassination spec, and it's set up to cast your PvP trinket, vendetta, and shadow blades all at the same time. This next macro isn't really a macro, I just have it set up so when I switch specs, I don't have to go to my spellbook and drag combat readiness onto my bars every single time. Next up, we have a Shadow Dance Cheap Shot macro, and what this does, it'll cast Shadow Dance, and if you hit it again, it'll cast Cheap Shot on your target. Its main use is for peels, but you could also use it for CC. Okay, next up we have a shift modifier deadly throw macro. So if you just hit the macro, it'll cast deadly throw on your current target. But if you press shift and then use the macro, it'll cast deadly throw on your focus target. This next macro is pretty self-explanatory. All it is a mouse over focus macro. So all I gotta do to focus a target is mouse over them and hit the keybind that you have this macro keybound to. Alright, now this is a focus gouge macro, and it's pretty much all in the name. All you gotta do to gouge your focus target is hit the macro. Okay, so this is a cast sequence focus redirect kidney macro. It works pretty similarly to the focus gouge macro. The only difference is you have to hit it twice because it is a cast sequence macro, so hitting it once will cast redirect, and hitting it again will cast kidney shot on your focus target. Okay, this next macro is pretty self-explanatory. When you hit it once, it'll cast Mark for Death on your target, and if you hit it again, it'll cast Eviscerate. Alright, now this next macro puts Recoup up, but the main reason behind using it is to cancel Hand of Protection. This next one is just a basic sap, focus sap, shift modifier macro. And what it does, if you don't use shift, it'll sap your current target, but if you use shift, it'll sap your focus target. Alright, now this next one is just so I use my engineering gloves when I pop shadow blades, which give me a slight agility boost. This macro is my pre-med slice and dice macro, and what it does, if I use it once, it'll cast premeditation, and if I use it again, it'll cast slice and dice. This next macro is a Shadow Step Healer macro, and how it works is pretty much in the name. It'll Shadow Step you to your current healer so you can go ahead and eat traps or just go to your healer for heals or whatever. Next up we have a Vanish Sap macro, and how this works is say you see somebody go out of combat, just go ahead and vanish and hit it again and it'll sap them instantly. Okay, next up we have a Pre-Med Ambush macro, and what this does, if you use it once, it'll use Premeditation on your current target, and if you hit it again, it'll use Ambush. This next macro is a shift modifier blind macro. If you use it without using shift, it'll blind your focus target. If you use shift, it'll blind your current target. Next up, we have a basic all-out burst macro, and what this does when you pop it, it'll cast Shadow Dance, Shadow Blades, and your PvP trinket, and if you hit it again, it'll cast Ambush. Next up we have another modifier macro, but this one's a little different. This is a control modifier macro. So if you use it without using control, it'll cast Cheap Shot on your current target. And if you use control, it'll cast Cheap Shot on your focus. Okay, now we have another shift modifier macro, so if you use this macro without using shift, it'll disarm your current target, but if you use shift, it'll disarm your focus target. This next one's a pre-med garrote and control modifier garrote macro, and what it does, if you don't use control, it'll cast premeditation and garrote on your current target, and if you use control, it'll cast garrote on your focus target. Alright, now this is another shift modifier macro. This one works exactly the same as the dismantle one. So I don't think I need to go into detail about this one, but there's one thing I want to point out. Some of you guys might be wondering why I have a focus gouge macro when I have a shift modifier, gouge, and focus gouge macro. And the whole reason behind this is because I have my kidney shot on 8 when I'm in stealth. But I wanted to show you guys this macro anyway because it's a great macro to have as long as you don't have the same keybind setup as I do. Okay, next up we have a macro that's known as a rogue's instant sap macro, and pretty much what it does, when you use it, it will immediately target the nearest enemy player and sap them. It's pretty much made to get stealth classes out of stealth. So say for instance you're dueling another rogue, all you gotta do is spam the macro and it will eventually find them and knock them out of stealth. Next up we have another shift modifier macro, this time for kick. If you don't use shift, it will kick your current target, and if you use shift, it will kick your focus target. This next macro is another cast sequence macro, and it works exactly the same way as the focus target version of it. If you use it once, it'll use redirect on your current target, and if you use it again, it'll use kidney shot on your current target. Alright, now some of you might be wondering why I have two separate sap macros, and the whole reason behind this is because this is my subtlety spec sap macro, and I have it set up so it monitors the cooldown of premeditation. Okay, next up we have yet another shift modifier macro, and this time for Shiv. It works exactly the same way as all the other ones, so I don't think I really need to go into detail on what it does. Next up we have a shift modifier, shadow step, and shadow step kick macro, and pretty much how it works, if you don't use shift, it'll shadow step your current target, but if you use shift and hit it once, it'll shadow step your focus target, and if you hit it again while still holding down shift, it'll kick them. This next macro may not seem like much, but it's probably one of the most important macros you can have as a rogue. It's a spammable stealth macro, and how it works is pretty much in the name. You can continuously spam it, and you won't get knocked out of stealth. Next up we have a basic tricks macro, and how it works is it will give tricks of the trade to your desired target. And finally we have another engineering macro, and how this one works is it will either pop my PvP trinket or my engineering gloves depending on which one's up. Well, that's pretty much it. Those are all my macros. I really hope you all got some out of this. If you did, please be sure to leave a like and a comment. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.